Hi guys, this is Max from Make It Conscious. Hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to be talking about habit 4 of the 7 habits of integration. Habit 4 is to contribute your unique and specific value. So this is very much about livelihood and how we can improve the state of our minds and the state of the world through our livelihood. Livelihood is really how we earn our keep on this planet, and of course there's a kind of spiritual significance to that, because our whole existence requires us to take. It requires us to eat, it requires us to have shelter. There's a number of basic needs that we require by virtue of being a creature in this world, by virtue of having energy needs and the rest. So there's always going to be, as long as we live, a need to consume something from the world around us. And so of course, if we are attaining to wholeness, there has to be a compensation for that. If we were just only ever to consume from the world around us, then that is very much conducive towards disintegration and separation, and very much bolsters the ego and the sense of self. But of course, if we acknowledge that not only do we take from the world around us, that we also have this need and an opportunity to give back to the world around us. And not only give, but to contribute, to go beyond merely earning our keep, and to partake in an act of creation, which is what drives things forward. It's actually what gives us the material capability to attain to individuation in the first place. One could make the case that the modern world, with all its complexity and opportunity, actually provides the greatest resources for individuation that the world has ever seen. So we live at quite a unique time in that respect, and what I personally believe is that we are moving forward via this process of evolution that is reflected at a societal level. There is a wall of awareness that is moving forward. It's bringing the average level of awareness forward as time moves on. Now, that may not be an opinion shared by, certainly not by everybody, because that would not be possible, but even by a majority. I think that's my perception, is that there are at least a lot of people who think that the world is getting worse in some way, or that there's never been so much ignorance. And I certainly don't think that. I think we should be mindful and understanding of where we've come, where we're going, the progress that has been made, sure, in a material, very measurable, concrete way, whether we're talking about average life expectancy, that's just going up and up and up, whether we're talking about deaths in childbirth, that's just going down, 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 down. Same for things like number of deaths in war, same for things like number of people dying of disease and so on. Whatever metric we choose to use, by and large, the metrics are showing that, at least in terms of these metrics, life is improving. So at least in terms of these things we can measure, one could make the case the world is improving. But of course, the world is just a reflection of our minds, and I see it a bit differently. I see it that the world is providing ever greater support and opportunity for an individual to do the work towards wholeness, towards individuation. So broadly speaking, there are 3 ways I think that we can approach our need for livelihood. The first is to not do anything, to merely take from the world around us and hope that somehow we will get by that way, that we can just perpetually take and never really have to give anything in return. Not that we are seeing it as a kind of exchange per se, but just it's more of an attitude thing, that we believe the world ought to just sustain our existence, and that we ought to be rewarded for the mere act of existing. Now, of course, there's many problems with that because of what that actually suggests about the state of our mind. It is not necessarily about the act of giving per se, but about what it's saying about our mind and what our mind is becoming in that process. So this first way is problematic and not conducive to wholeness. The second way is a more conventional, typical approach to livelihood, which is to apply ourselves to a pre-existing need in the world and for the most part meet expectations. So this is like, say, the typical corporate career or any job really where we are acting a bit like a cog in a machine. We're doing what the job requires, but we're not really bringing an act of creativity to that position. So we're not really going beyond the needs. We are just doing what is required and not bringing in an act of creation. So we can end up being in quite a competitive environment if we do this. This is sort of typical capitalism as it exists today. Not so much the original intention of capitalism, but the way it exists in mature and declining industries, because there's less innovation, and so we're really just meeting spec, and that means that we're replaceable, and that means that whatever we're giving in that role, whatever purpose we might feel, is not something that is attributable just to what we have to offer. So the third way of approaching livelihood is habit 4. It's to contribute your unique and specific value to the world. And this is really the part that's conducive to becoming whole and individuating. Now, this can very much still be done within a corporate environment. There's absolutely nothing inherently bad or wrong about large organizations working together to achieve something. When I talk about the corporate environment, I more broadly am referring to the quite sort of stereotypical, conventional, bureaucratic way of doing things in industries that aren't seeing a lot of innovation. So we might be talking about like telecoms, oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, these kinds of things, where at this point it becomes very much like an entity that is insisting upon its own existence, not leading to a kind of progress and growth. And so in other words, there's a lot more competition, direct head-to-head competition, and far less creativity. Now, in that kind of environment, it's a lot harder to contribute our specific value. If there is a opportunity for someone else or something else to just come in and replace the value that we're offering, then we can't really claim to be that purpose-driven. If we say that we are driven by purpose, contributing something unique, but then there's this AI robot over here that is poised to take our jobs away from us, as it were, well, the only reason that's going to be able to happen is if that machine actually does a better job. You know, like the machine works longer, doesn't get tired, does it faster, more efficiently. So if purpose is really what we're intending on delivering here, then we can't really deny the opportunity of that other alternative to do the job and still claim to be focused on purpose. Really, if that's happening, what we're doing is we're insisting on our own existence, our own role, our own separate self, at the expense of doing what is better for the whole, arguably. This is not to say there aren't other challenges associated with automation, which is not really the remit of this video, but just in terms of producing something in the world and contribution, it can only come from applying our unique value and our specific value to the world, because otherwise we're actually denying the opportunity of something that can do a better job. So this is why knowing our unique set of facts and contributing our specific value are absolutely essential if we are to attain to wholeness. So like with all 7 habits of individuation, there are 3 key facets to habit 4, which can help us break down this habit into a bit more detail and understand how it applies in life. The first facet of habit 4 is to know your unique set of facts. So this is, as it sounds, about coming to know ourselves really, really well and what makes us unique. Now, this is not the same as holding on to an idea of ourselves. This is about taking a honest and balanced look at the way our psyche actually is structured by default. And this is where Jung can actually help us a great deal. Jung devised the theory of personality type, and this was developed further by many people, and particularly Isabel Myers and Catherine Myers-Briggs, who developed the Myers-Briggs type indicator personality profiling system. So not going to go into too much detail about the profiling system here, but it divides every personality, or every person rather, into 16 personality types. And this is based on our preferences around how we perceive information and how we make decisions in the world. And this is just an immensely powerful framework for seeing our minds clearly and for seeing how other people, again, perceive information and make decisions in the world. And it just helps us understand the vast extent to which people are different. And it's not just about how they see the world and how they make decisions. It's about where they get their energy and where they feel in flow. So for one person who building, say, their internal model of the world based on logic, that's just a really easy thing for them. It just gives them dopamine. It's like where they find their flow. And yet for that person, making decisions that are based on the needs of a group could be far less intuitive, and yet for another individual it could be completely the other way around. And it's only really going through life experience and testing the extremes of our personality that we actually learn to understand just how different these two modes of being can be, let alone when we bring in 16 personality types. Now, if you know your type and you've met other people of your type, you'll have some idea of just how different people, even within the same type, can be. Like, there are vast differences between two people, even of the same type. But what's interesting is the way their mind is wired serves some really key similarities. And so this personality type is really just one way in which we can come to understand our unique set of facts. And it takes us about as far as understanding 1/16 of our uniqueness. But there's, of course, a lot more depth we can go to in terms of our interests, our preferences, the kinds of relationships we have, the kind of people we tend to get on really well with, not to mention our cultural background, the kinds of work environments we've worked in, our experiences with people, our experiences of travel, of the world, our personal values, our dreams, all these things. So these all contribute to our unique set of facts. Now, there's only so many categories one can relay as a useful way of guiding through this process. The clue is in the word unique, right? There is no one else in the world that is you, that can be you, and that has your unique set of facts. So these categories, like personality type, can only take us so far. The real aim is to get to your unique set of facts, which is one in just short of 8 billion at this point in time. In fact, more than that, because you've got to think about all the people that have ever lived. And there will never be anyone else that can be you. So again, this isn't about clinging to an idea of self, quite the opposite. It's actually about seeing ourselves as we truly are, but also being upfront and honest about what our unique set of facts is, our strengths and weaknesses, our preferences, crucially, and also what might be in our blind spots and often what we aspire to, which, funny enough, is often the same thing. So it's really about just being very clear on that. And naturally out of that comes number 2, facet 2, which is contribute your specific value to the world. Now, this is actually more concerned with how we apply our unique set of facts in the world. So if the first facet answers the question, who am I? The second facet answers the question, what can I do? So this is really about how we apply our value in a specific way in the world, and do that in a way that, because it's drawing on our unique set of facts, it's applying our value in a way that is creative and that only we can truly offer it in that way. So it's absolutely essential that we bring our true selves to this process of giving to the world. Otherwise, we can't really say that we're doing something that can't be replaced by someone else, and therefore we're not attaining to wholeness or individuation. So there's a modern marketing concept that can help us understand this facet a bit better, and that's the concept known as the long tail. So where this idea came from literally was from search results. So imagine if you are searching for something on Google, you might be searching something that's really generic, like LCD TV. So that would be not a long tail search term. But as we get further and further down the long tail, we might be searching things like 42-inch Sony LCD screen 2022, like something really specific. And this concept actually applies in many facets of life. It's the idea that there is a bulk of interest and search results that are quite generic. We might call that the head of the search terms. But then as you move down, approximately half, if not more, of the interest and the traffic actually goes into niche terms, niche ideas, niche interests. And this is very much a defining theme of the 21st century. It's that things are becoming more niche. There's an ever greater expanding opportunity to know oneself and to contribute your specific value. Say you were born with the DNA of a genius level software programmer 500 years ago, right? There would have not been any way to apply your specific value, at least in the world of computer programming. You might have then applied your value in other ways, but the opportunity to do so would have been limited. There would have been ways. I mean, there were geniuses born in all eras, of course, but the world was not ready for the full potential of that individual to be contributed in that way. So they might have had the same DNA as a genius level software programmer today, but they would most likely have gone into something else. They might well have become the next Newton or the next Pythagoras. However, it's probably far more likely that they would have ended up in something that did not fully utilize their unique set of facts or allow them to contribute their specific value. They could conceivably have ended up going into farming or being a blacksmith, and not that there's anything wrong with those things, it's just that it wouldn't have been the way for that person to contribute their specific value to the world. So in this day and age, there is just an ever expanding number of niche interests that are available for people to get interested in, to collaborate around, to form communities around. And so we're more likely to actually find people who share our interests and that we can then contribute our value to. I mean, these days we might be interested in equestrian Tai Chi is what I often think of as like an example of a really niche interest. It does exist. You can go online, you can search online courses, digital products about equestrian Tai Chi. There might be like bubble tea recipes. Where did that come from? There might be, cryptocurrency technical analysis. There might be cryptocurrency on-chain analysis, like these really niche things that are providing huge amounts of value to the world and providing linchpins around which people can actually coalesce and form communities and really find new ways of expressing themselves and discovering themselves. So there's a kind of reiterative process going on here in our livelihoods, where on one hand we are contributing value, but on the other hand we're also learning more about ourselves through the process of contributing in our livelihood. So we're bouncing back between these two sides, because on one hand we actually, in order to contribute more, the more we know ourselves, the more capable we are going to be of doing that. So as we do that, we end up contributing more, and then as we end up contributing, we end up learning a lot about ourselves. Like pursuing a career is one of the greatest ways to learn about ourselves. So we then bounce back to learning more about ourselves, we then contribute more, and so on. Over time, we're gradually finding that middle ground until ultimately we know our unique set of facts and we are contributing our unique and specific value to the world. There's also a middle way to be drawn between these first two facets, knowing our unique set of facts and contributing our specific value to the world. Because if you think about it, if we were to just do one of those two things, or attempt to do one of those two things, well, as I suggested, we actually can't do the other one perfectly. We kind of need them operating in tandem. On one extreme, if we purely just adopt a complete authenticity and knowing our unique set of facts really well, but don't give enough attention to how to apply it specifically, well, this looks more like what I would consider the sort of stereotypical starving artist, someone who is incredibly gifted at art and is just coming from this place of raw authenticity, but has completely neglected any thoughts about how to actually take that value to the world and apply it in the world as it's configured today. Almost as though there's a kind of expectation that if I just do my thing and only do my thing, because you've got to do your thing, but if that's all we do, then it will just kind of magically happen. Now, what does this sound like? Of course, this sounds like ego, this sounds like separation, this sounds like disintegration, not conducive to wholeness. And yet, if we take the other extreme, someone who is just working within the world as it's configured today, but not really being true to themselves, not being authentic, then they may be great at systemizing and making certain things happen, but because they're not coming from a place of authenticity and uniqueness, well, first of all, they're likely to be easily replaceable, and at the same time, they're also not going to be contributing something that is unique to them, that only they can really deliver. Now, the third facet of habit 4 is to take every opportunity to give. Now, this is really about making giving a habit, because as we've alluded to many times in this video, what we're bringing into the world is a creative action. And so in some ways, like all good things that exist in the material world have at some point come from a place of generosity and giving, and wanting to go beyond merely meeting our own needs or giving just enough so that we can get our own needs met. The whole reason we have progress really is because there is a kind of generosity going on. So I think this comes back to ideas like the invisible hand from Adam Smith. If you're not familiar with that, it's this idea that by each person acting independently in an economic capitalist system, that it actually creates a greater good for all. Now, I would go further and say that actually, if that was all people were doing, that will only produce a very competitive and self-serving environment, and that even within the context of doing what's right for your business, if you bring a generosity to that, do good work for the sake of doing good work, then that is what is actually producing the genuine growth and progress that we see in the world around us. Like, that is what's bringing new inventions into the world that save lives and that improve the health of people around the world, for example. One little reading recommendation here is to check out The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. And there's a poem written by him, which was The Prophet on Work. Very powerful poem about bringing love and generosity into one's work. I'm not going to read it here, but I highly recommend you check that out. It's a very beautiful illustration of exactly the kind of thing I'm trying to convey in this point. So this third facet, take every opportunity to give, is really just about taking that attitude of working because it's the right thing to do, not because I'm just trying to get something from work, but understanding that this is a vehicle through which I can contribute value that makes the world better. And so it's important to remember here as well that we're not only going for those big, grand decisions that change the course of our business or change the course of our lives. It's the little things. The little things are the big things. It's going the extra mile for that customer, not because you think, this one customer is going to bring me good. It's about, again, working on our own mind. It always comes back to this. If we do something good to help that one customer, even if it actually costs the business a little bit of money, it's actually not the point. It's that we've created something in the process. We've gained so much more than what we feel that we might have lost by going the extra mile for that one person, for instance. And there's another fundamental point to this facet as well, which is that we don't have to wait until we feel that we completely know ourselves to go and contribute something. Giving value doesn't have to be something we get paid for, doesn't have to be something we necessarily even do at the workplace. It can be any little thing, any little opportunity. Like as we're walking around the town we live in and we see someone who maybe needs help, we just go and give them a hand. If we hold a door for someone, we give a piece of bread to a homeless person on the street. It's these really little things, because not only are we helping people in the process and making the world a little bit better through a small act of generosity, we're also changing the condition of our mind in the process. Now, on some level, we could argue those two things aren't really as separate as they seem. See habit 1, take responsibility for your mind. Right, we are working on the premise that what we experience as we go about life is our mind. This is empirically true. Even at a neurological level, all we ever experience is, one might say, the brain, but even that is an experience in consciousness, right? Like what we experience is the mind. Whether we think in very practical material terms or whether we think in a more esoteric way, doesn't really change the fact that by taking every opportunity to give, we not only improve the perceived environment and the state of the world, but we also improve the state of our mind. And so we don't have to wait until we are CEO of our own company or that we feel like we really finally know ourselves completely and we're out there contributing our specific value in our niche, we can take any opportunity at any time. And sometimes your unique set of facts and your specific value might simply be where you happen to be and when you happen to be there. You might just be in the right place at the right time, and it might be that you are the one at that time who has that opportunity to actually do something that is generous and makes the world a slightly better place. You might say actually makes the world a lot better, because these little interactions, these really are, even these little, they're like droplets in a pond, they just expand out. And so with a little lever, a little act, you can actually do a lot. You can make a huge change in the world. Before we begin the individuation process, before that marked line in the sand where we start being more true to ourselves, there is a tendency to think that in order to have an impact on the world, we have to be famous, we have to have X number of followers, we have to be a big personality or have some senior or significant role in something. That is all just ideas, because it is absolutely impossible that one person would have any more impact than any other. If you think about it, the lady who sells fruit and veg on the street is interacting with the world just as much as the CEO of an oil company. They're both interacting with the world. They're both making decisions that affect the world. You might say that the CEO is making bigger decisions, or is making decisions that affect more people. Is he really? Because how do you know that his decisions aren't being affected by that lady who's selling fruit and veg in the street, right? She may not be considered an influencer in the public eye, but she might be influencing the influencers. Let's imagine these two people meet. Let's imagine he's walking down the street and she's selling some fruit and he decides to buy some. Now, if she just happens to take an opportunity to give and gives this guy some of her energy, some of her time, that's going to have an impact on both of them. What's that going to do now for his decisions in the wider world? So it's actually a bit of a fallacy to think that you have to be operating from a senior position in society. You have to be perceived as being important and senior to make that kind of change. That is an ego construct. It's actually not true, because we're all influencing each other all the time. And there's another really important point that's come out of this, which is that contribution can take many forms. It can be energy, time, or resources. And so even if we feel that we don't have any resources that we can always give a smile, we can always give some energy, and we can often give some time as well. So by taking every opportunity to give, we actually get a bit more creative about what it is we can actually do in that moment to both improve the state of the world and improve the condition of our minds. Final point before we wrap up here, and it's a really important one, and that is that taking every opportunity to give is actually not the same as doing what I would call impulsive giving or reactive giving or like scattergun giving, right? This is where we're giving out of our own craving, our own impulsivity. It's often a bit counterintuitive. Like, it'd be very easy to judge ourselves for not giving to a charity because we've seen, a very upsetting image on a train or on a TV advert, or to judge someone else for not giving their money to causes that we think are worthy. Well, of course, our resources in some sense are limited. Now, you could argue that, in another sense, they're limitless because it's all coming from our minds at the end of the day. Yes, but the real limitation comes from the fact that we're not seeing something clearly, the fact that our consciousness may be limited. And therefore, if we are not integrating the opposites in the way we decide to give, then we're going to be one-sided in our giving. We're going to be giving out of our own mere desire to relieve ourselves of pain. And that means that we're neglecting the part of consciousness that goes, well, what would actually be best for the world? And so it's a good idea to actually, through our giving, take a balanced approach. It's not just about what makes us feel better. On its own, that's a very imperfect measure of whether it's an effective form of giving or not. At the same time, we can't just be purely logical, because we have to fold in the feeling aspect into those logical decision making. Now, for all the reactive giving that goes on, there's still a lot of people out there who could really benefit from our resources and our time and our energy. So a lot of reactive giving isn't really solving any of these problems at a deep level. And so we need to consider the effectiveness of our giving. There are some very interesting organizations that have been set up purely for this purpose. Organizations like Effective Altruism and Goodwill, these organizations are doing some really important work in actually looking at what is the best way to use our resources in order to do the most impact in the world. And so we have to bring together both this genuine compassion, this interest in the well-being of other creatures in the world, and at the same time we also have to bring in the logical and effectiveness side of things, so that we can marry those two, and that way we'll actually be not only improving the state of the world around us in the best way, but actually improving the state of our minds, because it is at essence an integration of opposites in our psyche. So that was habit 4, contribute your unique and specific value. First facet, know your unique set of facts. Second facet, contribute your specific value to the world. And the third facet, take every opportunity to give. Hope that was useful, guys. I shall chat to you next time.